If you're just joining us, this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. We'll get started in just a few minutes. And we are live on YouTube. Welcome, everybody. Just letting everybody in the door. If you're just joining us, this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall on Zoom. Takes a few minutes to let everybody in. Welcome. If you're just joining us, this is the Renters Alliance Renter Town Hall. I'm going to take a few minutes to let everybody in the door. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. Okay, let's get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Losack. I'm co-founder and executive director of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. With me is David Mullins on staff and Pat Beckham and Malek Demir. We are expecting Fernando Ortega from Health and Human Services to join us a little bit later on, and possibly some others. I guess it must be a busy time up there because it seems like we've had some challenges getting a hold of people. We are doing the very best we can. Let me give some updates. First of all, as you all have heard already, the COVID rent relief program from Montgomery County, the fourth phase, is set to close on this Friday the 13th, close of business. The manager of that program, Fernando Ortega, will be here to answer questions and give us an overview of what's happening with that program. And we'll address some of your questions and concerns. Obviously, we are all deeply concerned about what's going to happen to thousands of renters who are still behind in their rent. I'm sorry to say that the problem of renter instability and affordability is not just a Montgomery County issue, but it is actually a national issue. And we are working as hard as we can, at least in Montgomery County and in the state of Maryland, to address some of these issues. But it is very concerning to all of us. I am privileged to serve on the Governor-elect Moore and Lieutenant Governor-elect Aruna Miller's housing transition team. And I'm even more privileged to say that our chair of our board, William Roberts, is the co-chair of the Housing Transition Committee. We had a lengthy meeting, I want to say yesterday, discussing some of the priorities that we're bringing to the new governor's administration, hoping that they will address them. One is that the Department of Housing and Community Development, that is the state housing department, has historically been focused primarily on building of housing and helping people get home ownership. And this is a tradition that's actually existed at the federal level as well with housing and urban development. And yet, over the last 40 years, renting has become not just a station on the way to owning, but actually a permanent way of life. We've gone in 2007 in Montgomery County, a statistic that is reflected nationally, from about 23% renter to nearly 40% renter. Where people could, in the 1950s, afford a home if you were working class, that has become out of reach in places like Montgomery County. Anybody who's tried to buy a home in downtown Silver Spring knows that 20, 30 years ago, you could have gotten a two-bedroom house for $90,000. That same home is now about $600,000 and is way out of reach of working class folks. So that's one reason why people are moving into rental housing and can't choose another way to live, can't buy a home. Other reasons have also come into play. That includes people having to do more with less at work and having less time. In the 1950s, where you might have had one breadwinner in the house, now you have mother and father working and having to pay for childcare. And so time has become very important for people. And so the long commute to home is not something that people can do anymore. So they're moving closer to public transportation, to entertainment, to shopping, to medical care in more urban areas like Silver Spring, Bethesda, and Rockville. And if you're going to live in a more urban area, finding a house is nearly impossible, or a home to buy, as I mentioned before. But now your choice for housing is rental housing. So we're seeing an increasing number of people who are renting their homes permanently. In addition, we're also seeing a large number of people who are becoming seniors and moving into Montgomery County, either becoming seniors from Montgomery County or moving in from outside to Montgomery County. And seniors now, because of the change in the national economy, whereas you used to be able to work for a corporation for 30 years and receive a retirement, that changed in my lifetime, so that now you have a 401k if you're lucky, but the real nest egg has become the family home. And so when people retire, they usually have to sell the home and create a nest egg for themselves and then move into rental housing. But what has happened in Montgomery County is that people don't realize how few protections they have when they move into the rental housing. So we're seeing now an unbridled economy in the rental housing industry, where rents are skyrocketing. Rent increases are in the double digits, and people are being priced out of their homes. Now, people who are middle and upper middle class, they're being stressed incredibly, wondering whether or not they're going to be able to afford their homes. And if that's true for the middle and upper middle class, you can only imagine the pressure on working and low-income families. We are seeing an increasing number of people pushed out of their homes, and an increase in homelessness and evictions. And evictions have returned with a vengeance. We are seeing the courts really processing evictions now full-fledged. We're seeing an increasing number of what's called tenant holding over. Tenant holding over is when the landlord decides that they're no longer going to give you a lease. So they say, with 60 days notice at the end of your lease, we want you to move out. And they don't have to say why. They don't have to find a justification for that. And so people are afraid to raise issues of services required or promised, issues in the building, disagreements with the landlord. They're frightened into saying anything at all, not saying anything at all, because they're afraid their lease won't be renewed. This is a major problem in the state of Maryland. Wasn't a problem before when you had housing choices, but when you don't have housing choices, then you're looking at homelessness or having to move away and possibly move away from your job and your life in your community. It's a major problem. The Renters Alliance has been working for almost a decade to pass what's called just cause eviction protection. Just cause eviction protection exists in New York, it exists in Washington, D.C., it exists in a number of other locations around the country that have had long-standing renter populations that have dealt with some of these issues a long time ago. But Maryland was considered a rural state and just didn't have the kind of housing issues that it has today. And so we're behind in terms of the legal infrastructure that protects renters. So with just cause eviction protection enacted, that would require a landlord to automatically renew your lease absent a justifiable reason not to. Now, obviously, there are justifiable reasons that we all understand. If you don't pay your rent, eventually you're going to be evicted. If you abuse the property or abuse the rules of the community and become justified to be evicted, then that's something. But there are also some other justifications that include a smaller landlord, for example, taking a rental apartment off the market permanently. They no longer want to rent a single apartment, or they want to move in a family member or an aging family member. Those could also be justifiable reasons. Or if there's going to be substantial renovations or maintenance going on that will make an apartment uninhabitable. With proper notice, those would all be justifications not to renew a lease. But for the vast majority of apartments in Montgomery County, we are seeing simply that landlords are issuing tenant holding over notices 60 days before the end of release in order to move out middle and low income families, working class families, in favor of those who can pay more. And it is grossly irresponsible from the Renters Alliance standpoint. And we will be calling on all renters who wish to address this issue to help us in Annapolis this year. Again, the history of this legislation was that it got very little attention in the past years, but in the recent years, thanks in good part to one of our board of directors, Delegate Janelle Wilkins, we have seen increasing support for it. Last year, we got the entire county council to support it. Mark Elrich, the county executive, has always supported it. And our state delegation, that is all of our state delegates and senators, the vast majority from Montgomery County, have supported this legislation. However, the Landlords Association, as you might expect, does not want to give up their prerogative to kick out anybody they want to whenever they want to. We think this is grossly irresponsible, but this is what we're up against. And unfortunately, the committee in Annapolis that handles housing is chaired by a delegate from Montgomery County, Kumar Barve, from Bethesda, who has opposed this legislation. We got tremendous support for a bill that would have been what's called local enabling. If Janelle's bill, Delegate Janelle Wilkins' bill, had passed, it would have simply said to all of the municipalities, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Baltimore City, all the counties in the state of Maryland, you can enact just cause eviction law in any form that you choose, but now you are empowered to do so. The reason why the localities can't do it now is because just cause eviction law is part of eviction law in general. And eviction law in general is state law. So it can't be done by the municipality without approval from the legislature to allow a local municipality to pass it. So we're just asking permission to do so. The landlords correctly understand that if it passes in one municipality, they will believe it's the camel's nose in the tent and everybody will enact it, and they're right. It is good law, it is good protection for renters, and they don't want to lose the prerogative, which I think is sort of antiquated, but that somehow that they view renters as temporary residents, like living in a hotel that they can kick out anytime they want. This is very poor housing policy. The Renters Alliance has always taken the position that housing is not the same thing as beer and cigarettes and fancy shoes and pocketbooks. It is central to community health, welfare, stability, and prosperity. And so when you enter into the landlord business, whether you have a single apartment you're renting or your corporation renting thousands, in exchange for your reasonable profit and your ability to maintain increases in rent, modest increases in rent that keep up with your reasonable overhead, that in exchange for that, you promise, should be by law, to keep people housed in stable quality homes, absent a good reason not to. So we really are getting to a point where housing instability has become not just a side story, but front and center in Montgomery County, in Maryland, and in other places across the country. I've recently been traveling in other places in the country, and I am seeing thousands upon thousands of people who are homeless. The homeless community has traditionally been those who suffer primarily from chronic illnesses, mental illnesses, substance abuse, but increasingly that population are low-income folks, working-class folks, who simply are being pushed out of their homes in favor of what we would consider gouging profits. Double-digit rent increases, there is no excuse for that. Homeowners would never allow, and we saw this happen when mortgage rates were allowed to go through the roof. And we saw a foreclosure crisis with people losing their homes. And the federal government stepped in to address that. Yet with nearly 40% of the United States population living in rental housing, and with the majority of those people being working and low-income families and disproportionately people of color, we had better address this issue, or we're going to see an increase in the racial divide, anger, and disruption. We're going to see increasing numbers of children in our schools who have to move from school to school, whose academic performance is going to be impacted. So there are social consequences to this and financial consequences to this if we don't stop considering housing as a common commodity and start considering it something more akin to a utility. Now, we're not completely over on the left side of this. We understand that it's a market and we encourage people to enter it and be good landlords and make some money, but they have to have a balance of the social responsibility of stable, affordable, quality housing, along with their market interests of making a little money. So that's my opening spiel on the Moore Miller transition team. That's Just Cause is what we're pushing. We're also pushing that the Department of Housing and Community Development start thinking about resources available to renters through the department, including outreach, education, organizing tenants associations so that tenants understand their existing rights, and then also expanding those rights to make sure that homes are truly protected. Right now, they are not. We are all extremely vulnerable. I've seen rent increases for myself in the double digits, and I expect that that's coming down the pike. All of us here are renters, and it's a real problem. We are also I'm sorry, is there a question?
No, that was me. I just wanted to remind our renters that if you get a excessive rent increase, please notify the Office of Landlord Tenant. They are interested in all excessive rents, and we are going to say excessive rents are about anything over 4.4%. And we'll put that address in the chat for everyone. It's important. They need to have this information.
Yes, and it's ulta.intake@montgomerycountymd.gov, which leads me to the next thing that we need to discuss. There is a rent stabilization bill that is being considered by the county council. It was proposed by County Executive Mark Elrich. It is a permanent rent stabilization bill. In the past, we had 2 emergency bills that were put in place because of COVID. We needed to keep everybody stable in place because we didn't want to spread this virus. And so the council passed an emergency rent stabilization first at, I think it was 2.5%, which was the county's voluntary rent increase guideline, which was made required. That went on to become a second round at 0.4%, which was the county's guideline. But that expired on May 15th. Now there's a kind of a delusional discussion that everything is coming back to normal and we don't need any kind of rent stabilization. We have always supported the need for rent stabilization in Montgomery County. Again, from a balanced approach. We do not oppose landlords maintaining their profits. We don't oppose a landlord acting in good faith, keeping up with their genuine overhead expenses. But we do oppose rent gouging, and we do oppose this kind of whatever the market will bear at the expense of community stability. That cannot be a narrative in housing policy that works. So the council is going to be considering this bill. The Renters Alliance is very much in discussions as to what that bill will look like. It may be a percentage higher than the voluntary rent increase guidelines. We think that there needs to be a rent board that determines what the annual rent increase will be. We think that there needs to be flexibility in the rent stabilization program that allows for new development. So if you build a new apartment building, you may not be stabilized for a while so that you can recoup your initial investment. But at some point in the future, some years down the road, once you've recouped your initial investment and made a little profit, then it's time to stabilize. Another element which we would like the council and the executive to consider are two levels of stabilization. One is that the county, like all municipalities, needs a stock of low-income housing permanently. So there are apartment communities out there that have low-income apartments, and we'd like to see them permanently stabilized so that whoever lives in them, whether they move out or move in, whatever, that those apartments will never go up above the net annual increase. So they are permanently stabilized so that we'll always have apartments for working and low-income families, or at least a good chunk of them. The second level of a rent stabilization program would be those that are what we would call vacancy decontrol, which exists in New York and other places. So that when you move in, you choose an apartment you can afford and you move in at a rent level, and it stays stabilized for as long as you or your family lives in that apartment. But when you move out, the landlord would then have the option to increase the rent to whatever the market would bear. And then the next family or individual that moves in would then be stabilized. So that would be for another number of housing stock as part of the program. Another part we'd like the county to consider is some kind of rent-to-own scenario, so that there are small landlords in Montgomery County who own 6 or 10 or 14 units, something like that, and they don't want to own them anymore. They want to sell them. We want to make sure that they don't sell them to large corporations or to those who have no interest in maintaining stable, affordable housing, but instead create a scenario where they could be sold to the occupants who live in the building, perhaps with some subsidy from the county, or at a level that the people could use their rent to purchase. So that's something else that we'd like to see considered in the rent stabilization bill. We'd also like to see that there be no funny business going on. So one of the concerns is that if you have a rent stabilization program where you can only raise the rent a certain amount, that then the landlord is going to charge you $500 for parking. Well, we think that that can't happen. So we want to see language in the bill that says you cannot go around the rent stabilization requirements by increasing unjustly fees for utilities, for parking, for amenities in order to make a profit alternatively from rent. So that's also something to consider. And while there is some debate with some of our allies that smaller landlords might be deobligated from a rent stabilization bill, the Renters Alliance does not think so. We think that if you enter into the landlord business and you decide to let an apartment, whether it be a single apartment, 5 apartments, a condo, whatever you're renting, first of all, it should be licensed. And if you have a licensed apartment that It falls within the requirements of the county's code enforcement and other safety and quality standards, that you should also be stabilized. There's sort of a fallacy out there that some of our opposition likes to push, that somehow rent is just barely covering the expenses of an apartment. And that's not the case. If that's true for you as a landlord, then you're in the wrong business. A landlord should charge rent that includes the cost of running their place, overhead expenses, and a measure of profit. And that's where you start. It's not that the rent is only covering your expenses. That's not true. We believe that the landlord industry everywhere, but particularly in our area, is making a good chunk of money out of rent. And we believe they should maintain that profit margin, but they shouldn't be allowed to increase it just because the market says there's other people out there who can pay a lot more, and therefore we're going to force you out of your home by raising prices so high that you can't afford it. So those are some of the elements of the rent stabilization bill that we'd like to see enacted. We encourage all of you to write to us. Let us know what you're thinking. If you've got ideas for this, we would certainly enjoy everybody's participation. But at the end of the day, the county council needs to hear from every renter in Montgomery County. They need to know that we are serious about this, that housing instability is not acceptable any longer, that it's gotten to a margin where we're all going to pay a price socially and financially if we don't stabilize our rental housing. Renters United Maryland is an organization we co-founded. That is our state loosely put together alliance of organizations that support rental housing protections, rent stabilization in municipalities, and just cause eviction. We have a few bills that this organization is pushing in the state legislature, just cause at the top of the list, but also we would like to see the possibility of renters being able to fight for their rights collectively. Right now, if you make a complaint, only the tenant, a single tenant who makes the complaint, has a standing in court. We'd like to see it so that when a renter has a problem that many other renters in the building also have, that they will have standing, legal standing as a group to fight for that issue in court. It's a little more complicated than I'm going to go in tonight, but that is a principle that we also support. And by the way, that bill is being promoted by another Renters Alliance board member, State Delegate Vaughn Stewart. And we're pretty lucky to have a great board. Is there anything else, David, that I'm missing in terms of Renters United Maryland's priorities that we were discussing? Rescue me.
I was gonna double check, but I mean, did you cover there was something about continued rental assistance, I thought, or more funding in general, as we're kind of getting into the end of rent relief here, that seems related. But that, I think, no, that was it. That was the Tenant Justice Act, or the Tenant Safety Act now, and but yeah, it sounded right. And then I just made a note about just cause eviction, that I do want to highlight, it does exist in a few units. And then also, if you have a subsidized unit, not if you're subsidized through a voucher, but if the unit itself is subsidized, there's some lingering Section 8 programs. There might be a protection there too. Just want to throw that out there.
In the LIHTC program, the low.
Well, the LIHTC program for sure. If there's a covenant under the state tax credit, we would definitely want to look into that. But also, then just a Section 8 on site from HUD, some places could be protected too. We've heard. So we're glad to follow up about that.
So I guess it's complicated. It took us years to figure it out. And if you're just listening to us now, it'll take you a while to figure it out. But if you have any questions, if you're facing a tenant holding over vacancy notice, send us an email so that we can advise you and find out whether what your options are. LIHTC is the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. It's run by the Internal Revenue Service. It's a federal program. But if you live in a LIHTC building, Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program, there is a just cause eviction protection provision within that law. And we've been recently dealing with that in some places. And some of the property managers that run LIHTC properties don't always know what the law is, not just in this area, but in others too. So the Renters Alliance has a number of other proposals for renter protection legislation, which we'll go into at a later renter town hall. But we are working to get housing stable, quality, and affordable, and as a requirement if you're going to be a landlord here in Montgomery County, and for that matter, in the state of Maryland. This housing business being some kind of a whatever I can sell it for, and too bad if you don't like it, that's got to stop. It's far too important to our communities, to our prosperity, to the health and welfare of our citizens. We are seeing far too many people being pushed off the edge, literally out of their homes, onto the street, into mental illness, into hospitals, into our safety net programs, into our homeless shelters, injuring our prosperity, our academic achievement in our schools. It's central to everything to have this housing policy put in place in a sensible way. So I think I've droned on enough, and we are finally able to welcome Fernando Ortega, the manager of the COVID Rent Relief Program, the main topic of this evening. We welcome you, Fernando. I trust you got our agenda, can address some of the issues that we put out there. But this program is extremely important to thousands of people in Montgomery County. And you can begin in any which way you want. Do you need us to give you a share screen of any kind, or are you good?
No, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we're doing and kind of where that leaves us and that sort of thing. So again, Matt, thank you so much for having me on. So the COVID Rent Relief Program, as most of you know, is a program that was put forth by Department of Treasury to different communities to keep folks housed, to keep them from being evicted. This is the fourth iteration that we have had of this program in Montgomery County. We have been open for this iteration since May, had a small break, and then kept on going. As we continued to get through the applications and looking at what the grant was, we've made the decision to close the portal on Friday night by midnight, I guess is what we're doing. So what that means is that you still have time to get your application in. I would like to encourage, if you have an application that may not be completely done, don't have all the documents, please still submit the application, even if you don't have all the documentation, by Friday at midnight. Once the application is in, we can still work the application. We will still contact you. We can still work to get those documents and whatever other necessary items we need for the application. But we just can't submit any new applications once the portal is closed.
Fernando, if I may interrupt you on that point, since there was an email apparently that went out to applicants, and we've received a lot of concern and confusion about that. Are you all saying that if your application is in and under consideration, but you have not submitted all your documents, that there is a cutoff at midnight on Friday?
No. So if you've already submitted your application, you went through and submitted it to us, it's there. Just because you don't have all of your documents in there doesn't mean that it's not submitted. However, if you started the application and didn't click the submit button because you're like, well, I'm going to go back and put stuff in, that needs to get done by Friday night. So we need it in the portal because come midnight on Saturday morning, you won't be able to submit. The submit button basically will be grayed out. So again, even if you don't have all of your documents, at least, have your information, your, name, email address, phone number, all that good stuff. and submit it before Friday. And then we'll work with you to get that documentation once we get to your application. We're going to continue to work the applications that we have and that we have in there. We still have funding left. We're going to continue to work through our applications. As far as reopening the portal, right now it looks as though we will end up probably exhausting the funds with the applications that we have. But if we do have leftover funds, then we will talk about what our next step is, whether it's to reopen the portal or move those funds to our general emergency fund. With that being said, I also want to kind of talk a little bit about our emergency fund that's not tied necessarily to COVID. The only requirement is there is an income requirement of you have to be at 60% of annual median income or below. You have to be a Montgomery County resident. You can call 311 to apply for that. You can also go in person to apply for that at 3 of our offices in Montgomery County. One is in Germantown, one is in Silver Spring, and then the other one is in Rockville at our HSS offices. You need some sort of court date, court documents, or a judgment. And we can, help you out with that. Like I said, it's a different pot of money. There's also a possibility of, if you qualify that for rehousing money to basically find a new place, we could possibly help you out with a deposit and first month's rent to get you going. So it kind of just depends on the situation. But like I said, if the COVID rent relief, you don't qualify or you don't get the application in, that is still there for us as the regular emergency rental relief.
You're not going to get off that easy, Fred. No. So let me ask some more specific question. How much money is left that you know of?
Yeah, so right now we have approximately $17 million left. We've gone through about 2/3 of the applications. So there's still 1/3 of the applications left to process. So we're about at 60% of our funds have been exhausted. And we're moving forward. Like I said, we're going to go through every application that's submitted to look to see if they qualify. And you'll get a letter in the mail if you don't. And if you do, then we'll talk about that, and we'll exhaust the funds with every application we get.
And can you give us the overview of the Pulse information? What's percentage of applications that you all have processed? How many are in process? How many have been denied? How many are still not yet being processed?
Yeah, so we have 33%, like I said, about 1/3 of the applications that we still need to go through. Of the 2/3, the 66% that we've gone through, we've approved 23%. 28% have been ineligible, deemed ineligible for different reasons, whether it be they're over income or they didn't meet the requirement for 2 months behind by June 30th, or they have already reached their cap for how much they can receive. 16% are still being worked on. We're getting documents, we're checking things out, and we haven't given an up or down yet. Of
the folks who receive a denial, can you explain what, if any, is a appeal process?
Yeah, so we have an informal review process. If you're denied and you feel that you don't agree with the decision, they'll let you know what your reasoning for being denied was. There's an email address on the letter I believe it's Moco Housing at Montgomery County MD.gov. But it's on the letter. Send an email, say that you got denied, that you're requesting an informal review. One of our supervisors will review it, and then they will decide if you are correct that you shouldn't have been denied, or if they feel that it was a just denial. They will send you an email and let you know. If you still don't agree with that decision, then at the end of the day, I will take a look at it personally to see if you have, if the denial should be upheld, or if we should take another look at it and accept your application.
Well, I would also encourage anybody who feels that they've been unfairly denied or is confused by the program to reach out to us. We do have some experience and understanding of the program and the players, and we can guide you and give you the bad news or the good news. And we'll speak frankly to you and help figure out what's going on. Fernando, can you also tell us the issue that has come up before? What, if any, flexibility is there in these eligibility requirements? We understand that the initial eligibility requirement had a 2-month requirement to be behind in your rent, but there might have been exceptions. What kind of flexibility is there? And if there is going to be any, is it wait until you've processed the existing ones and then go back? Will it work in any way like that? Is there thinking along those lines?
So the 2 months by June 30th is pretty set as far as where the county is eligibility is concerned. Where there is some leeway is there. If you're 2 months behind, let's say you're a little bit less than 2% or 2 months behind, I'm given an allowance of about 10%. So if you're just short of it, for whatever reason, maybe the landlord put it towards a different month, or there was something that was kind of weird that happened, I'm still going to have a 10% allowance so that we can look at that. That's something that should be done on the first go round. Everyone knows the policy. But if I have seen a couple of cases where it's been denied, it's been appealed, and we've overturned the denial because that we had a 10% allowance. It hasn't happened a lot, but it has happened. So I just want to make sure everyone is aware of that. If they say that you don't have the 2 months by June 30th, but you look at your ledger and it's right there, like let's say you owe $2,900 and your rent was $1,500, we can take a look at that and allow that a little bit of leeway.
Right. Also, the issue of people who get back on their feet, but were 2 months behind in the past and then start paying their rent, as you should, but the landlord starts applying it to your back rent, and therefore it gives the appearance that you're not 2 months behind as of June, because your back rent, the money you were paying now, is being applied to back rent. Fernando, we've talked about this before, but can you explain how that should work?
Yeah, so how that works is if your landlord puts the rent that you've paid back towards where you first, it went due in May and June, you should still be 2 months behind. It would just be later on. If we can show on your ledger that at some point you were behind 2 months, May and June, and then you started paying rent, let's say recently, as long as you're still 2 months behind, and at one time you were behind May and June, then we can approve you.
So I'm a little confused on that point, because if you were behind 2 or 3 months or 4 months or 5 months, and you manage to start paying it down, and you pay down enough of it so that you're no longer 2 months behind, but you were due the COVID rent relief. So can you still get the relief even though you paid some of it yourself?
If you were 2 months behind and then you've paid, and you're saying you're no longer even 2 months behind at all, like you pretty much
Right. Maybe you took from your credit cards, maybe you took from your retirement, maybe you took from money that you need to go forward in order to pay, and the landlord put it on back rent, but you were entitled. The only reason why you didn't get it is because your application wasn't processed fast enough. And you were entitled to federal public dollars that came to you for rent relief, for COVID rent relief. Does the system address that? And is the person still eligible?
The way the policy is now, that this person would not be eligible. We can do, case by case, we can take a look at it. Again, that's kind of what that appeal process is for. But as the policy states now, you must be 2 months behind, and had have been 2 months behind by June 30th.
So unfortunately, that tells somebody who is back on their feet not to pay their rent, and then have to go to court and get a judgment against them in order to get that relief. So that's a tough choice.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely want them to pay their rent. I guess, if you still have that need, you still have 2 months behind, then you would still be eligible. But the way the policy is written currently is if you've paid it all the way up and you're back to a zero balance, whether it was from credit cards or however you ended up doing it, right now the policy is that you don't qualify. So again, that's something that we can take a look at on a case by case type of basis, but that's how the policy reads now.
All right. And Fernando, could you provide more specifics or repeat some of what you've already said about, for all of those tenants who did not qualify for COVID rent relief, but who are facing housing instability, what are the resources that the county has to help them, whether it be emergency funds to pay down a little bit that you're behind to keep you from being evicted, to utility assistance, to moving assistance, security deposit, what's out there as an alternative to the COVID rent relief program?
Yeah, so besides the COVID rent relief program, the county has emergency funds for people who are facing eviction. You can call 311 or go down to one of the 3 offices. They provide, depends on the household and what the household makeup is, but it could be up to $2,000 depending on the size of the household. We also have funds for relocation where we could help with the deposit and first month's rent if that's a possibility. We also have funding, like you said, for storage and that sort of thing. Utilities, OHEP and HSS both have grants for utilities. If you have a shut-off notice, etc. Each individual city, some of them also have some emergency funds as well. So that's definitely something that can be tapped into, depending on what city that you actually live in. But that's what we have right now. Again, 311, or go in person to the Silver Spring office, the Rockville office, or the Germantown office.
Right, that's a really important point. Rockville City, Gaithersburg City, and Tacoma Park also received COVID rent relief funds. And so if they are asking, of course, that folks apply to the county first, but that if you are denied or you didn't get sufficient funding, to also seek out resources if you live in Gaithersburg, Rockville City, or Tacoma Park. They also have resources available. David, what else do we have out there? Malek, Pat?
Fernando, just to clarify, is the total amount that anyone can receive is at $12,000, and that includes whether or not they had received money previously for COVID? Is the amount still $12,000?
Yes, if it depends on also what their income is. So if they're under they're from, I guess, under 30%, then they qualify for the full amount. But yeah, it depends also on if they've gotten it before as well.
Okay.
Okay, folks, what do we have in the chat?
Well, no, that was there a couple about a previous approval and the effect on that. So that was, I think that was the main one. But I guess my one question is about the emergency assistance that's come up. Is it if a denial for rent relief, for COVID rent relief, if that person is already in court, is there an automatic pathway to the emergency kind of relief casework that takes effect then?
There's not an automatic feed to that yet. It's definitely something I think we've kind of talked about, and we're looking into how we can go about doing that. But yeah, if you've been denied, you now have your court documents or your judgment. Definitely call 311 or go to one of those offices to apply
Right.
for the emergency rent relief.
And then we'll share that housing stabilization email. That's another way to get moved over then too, is to the HSS
Correct.
email also. Okay.
Yeah, we do want to remind folks that if you're in the application portal and you're in process with the COVID rent relief program and you receive a court summons or worse, if you had a judgment against you, you've gone to court, the judge made a decision that you owe the money, and if you don't pay it, you're going to be evicted, and you receive what's called a red and white notice on your door. That's the sheriff's warning that an eviction is coming. You must make sure that Health and Human Services COVID rent relief program are aware that you are in more critical situations so that they can prioritize your application. That is still the case. Yes, Fernando?
Correct. Yes. Yeah, we're still prioritizing based on where you are in the eviction process. Please let us know. Utilize that email to let us know so that we can upload the documents. So the way it's going to end up working with that is you can email the HSS website or the email address with your documentations, or we're going to continue to be at the court to try to help those folks upload it. It's going to have to be somebody from our team that actually does it because you'll no longer be able to yourself add documents, from what I understand. So it'll have to be from our team, but definitely let us know if something has changed in your case, for sure.
And again, if anybody runs into a snag or some difficulty, the Renters Alliance is here to help guide you with that. You can get in touch with us at info@rentersalliance.org. What else, staff?
Well, I think it's the typical questions that we get is
Yeah.
People who have not received any information. So they've applied in July, for instance. What kind of waiting period, turnaround period, is there anything they can do to escalate that decision-making process?
The only escalation for the decision is if something has changed in their eviction process, such as they now have a judgment or they have a white. They maybe before they didn't have any kind of court date or anything like that yet, but now they do. Definitely get that to us so that we can expedite your case.
So to be clear, a court summons will help to expedite. It doesn't have to be a red and white notice.
Sure.
Right.
I mean, it'll expedite it. Maybe it won't, expedite it to the top because we are probably working on
Okay.
red lights, but it'll expedite it for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Can I interject a follow-up just because I really want to, we were at a emergency assistance coalition meeting and there were some kind of questions about some of the statements at the in-person locations you listed about the emergency assistance. I want to be real clear. For that assistance is a judgment a judgment for the landlord is required for the assistance you laid out there, right? Not just having a court case.
So they can apply with a court date. However, it's similar to ours where they're going to be triaged, and a judgment is going to put them at a point where they're going to get their case worked on and give a thumbs up or down at that point.
Okay.
So again, I mean, they can definitely apply when they get a court date, but they need to make sure that they update them or go and apply for sure when they have a judgment.
That's a helpful distinction, though. Thank you. That they can receive the application at least for an
Yes.
emergency only assistance just for being in court. That's great. Okay.
David, help me out as I go through this, but I just want to restate the process of eviction so people understand how this works. Uh, If you're behind in your rent, we're talking about failure to pay rent cases, not breach of lease where the landlord is trying to evict you because he believes or she believes that you've done something wrong. But for a failure to pay rent case, first you should receive some kind of communication from your property manager or landlord saying you're behind, and if you don't pay, they're going to file. Then, if they intend to file with 10 days notice, they will give you a 10-day, what is it called, David? My mind isn't working.
Notice of intent to file, essentially,
It's,
in court.
A notice of summary ejectment is what it is. It's a court document that says in 10 days, they're going to file in court. That is not that it sounds like you're going to be evicted in 10 days. You're not. But we actually, the Renters Alliance and our partners passed a law. Used to be that you'd get a summons to be in court tomorrow. And we said, look, our tenants work, they can't take off time from work, they need to be able to plan. So now you receive a notice from the landlord after a threatening notice from the lawyer or the property manager that says in 10 days, we're going to file in court. So then they file in court and you will receive a court summons with a date to go to court. And it'll say why you're going to court, failure to pay rent being the most common.
And that's the bright yellow sheet that will be taped to the door.
That's right. Then you go to court, and if you still haven't paid the rent, the judge will hear from the landlord's attorney, and you'll have an opportunity to speak. If you haven't paid your rent, then there's a 99% chance that the judge is going to say, I'm judging against you for failing to pay rent, and allow the landlord to go forward with an eviction. Then the landlord has to file something's called a writ of restitution. That is, it's a simple document. They say, yes, I want to evict this person. They fill out the document. That document then goes from the court to the sheriff's office. The sheriff then schedules the eviction. That can be anywhere from a week to 6 weeks. There's no way to know. But when the sheriff receives that notice, they will at some point put what's called a red and white notice on your door. And it's a very severe notice. It says, warning, you're about to be evicted.
Final notice. Yeah.
Final notice. And that's when an eviction is becoming imminent. Your landlord cannot evict you, him or herself. They have to have a sheriff accompany them in order to evict you. They can't change the locks on your doors. They can't block your parking. They can't block your post office box. They can't reduce any services of any kind until the eviction date, when the sheriff arrives with the landlord to remove your belongings and put them on the street if there's no other alternative for you, or you haven't reached out to Health and Human Services to receive some kind of storage money or some other alternative. So that's the process. I wish I could tell you that we know exactly when a writ of restitution is filed from that point when you're actually going to be evicted. But a court summons is not an eviction. A 10-day notice of summary ejection is not an eviction. The landlord can get you a threatening letter that said they want you out in 10 days. They cannot get you out in 10 days without a court order. So just keep that in mind in terms of the eviction process. Obviously, we find it dreadful, but this is the way it works.
Well, and just to tack on, so to reiterate, when the red and white, sticker, final notice from the sheriff comes, that it is imminent. If you call them, they'll tell you it could be within, 2-3 weeks. Maybe longer, but possibly, that if they're getting caught up. But, if we're talking about a failure to pay rent situation, not a tenant holding over, you have up until that date when they do show up to pay that amount and stay in that unit, and what they call pay and stay. And so, sorting out exactly how much is owed related to that eviction is something that we're glad to kind of help out with, and that the county, as I've seen, be very helpful with as well. So thanks for that.
Right. And if you've received that kind of notice and you don't know what to do, please reach out to us. We will advise you and tell you what your options are, guide you to resources if we know of them. What else do we have out there? Questions and concerns that are coming in from the renters? Anything, Pat, Alec?
Well, there were some questions earlier about kind of related to rent increases. So I was trying to focus on the rent relief.
Well,
what to do? Do they go directly to Ulta and copy us when they get rent increases that are anywhere from 20 to 40%?
Well, first of all, you can swear up a blue streak, as I would. I think that it is outrageous, and we're with you there. But unfortunately, there is no rent stabilization in the state of Maryland, with the exception of Tacoma Park. And so right now, except in some limited circumstances where your property might be owned and run by a nonprofit organization that receives public funding, they may be stabilized, like Montgomery Housing Partnership, for example. Those few apartments, there's a little over 1,000 that are stabilized. As for everybody else, we're subject to market forces, and the landlord can raise the rent to any amount. It's outrageous, but they can. We've seen increases anywhere from double digits to over 200%, and it is woefully irresponsible. We want to know about it. We want you to send a notice to the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs at the Department of Housing and Community Affairs for Montgomery County, so that they can track the kinds of increases that we are seeing. And at some point, when the rent stabilization bill is being heard and considered by the council in a formal way, we'll be able to say, look at all of these increases. This has got to stop. We also want to know about it ourselves. What the county government can do and what we can do are two separate things. We are an independent nonprofit. We can work with the press and with elected officials and with the public in a way that a county official may not be able to do. So we want to have some synergy there, but we intend to be loud and raise these concerns in a responsible way. But we intend to really push this issue that this cannot be sustainable. So please send that to us. Yes, Pat.
Also, anyone receiving a summons to go to court, please go. Do not ignore those summons. It's important. Please go if you get a date to go to court. Do not ignore it.
If you miss that date, even if you have a good reason to defend yourself, you lose.
Right.
You don't go to court, you lose automatically. So
Absolutely.
by all means, please do so. What else? Have we also looked in the Q&A as well as the chat? Although I ask you all, please put your questions and concerns in the chat. They're easy for us to track, but is there anything in the Q&A?
That was a Q&A one that what you just answered, but someone was kind of specifically asking about county enforcement. And I sorry if I missed it, but everything you just laid out on top of that, if there is an increase so high that it's a constructive eviction, is there, I mean, you mentioned there's no rent cap for them to fall back on, but I guess they were wondering, is it a strongly worded letter? Is the best they can hope for from the county on that? Or is it what can they do if it's very high?
Well, there's no good answer here, but let me tell you what our experience is. The county has taken the position so far. They've taken two positions. A few years ago, they considered an excessive rent increase potentially as a constructive eviction. That is, if they're not actually evicting you, but doing something that would force you out of your home by any common sense standard. So if they raise your rent 1,000%, they might as well evict you. It amounts to a constructive eviction. It doesn't have to be 1,000%, 10%, 20%, 40%. The county has now changed that position and is not considering that a constructive eviction that they will enforce. That being the case, from the county enforcement, Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, that doesn't mean that you couldn't potentially get a lawyer and take them to court and argue that it is a constructive eviction. That is a tough road to hoe, but it is an alternative pathway for you. But I understand that this is a very difficult, challenging thing to do. For many people, the only alternative, if you're being priced out of your home, is to find another home. I will say that if an excessive rent increase comes, you do have the option to break the lease or end the lease and say, I'm not going to renew under these terms, and find alternative housing. The bad news, when it keeps getting worse, I'm sorry, but this is not the happiest conversation, but the alternative housing options in Montgomery County are extremely limited. And so people are having to move out far away from your homes, far away from your communities, far away from services, entertainment, family, medical services, public transportation. And this is all part of why we have a housing crisis. We are certainly hearing the landlords and developers promote the narrative that what we really need to do is just build more housing. Okay, but anybody who knows this business knows that the landlord developer industry is not going to build enough housing fast enough to create such competition that rents are going to come down. And even if the county were to invest hundreds of millions of dollars to build hundreds, if not thousands of apartments, they still won't be built for years. So it's just a fallacy. We need more housing. The Renters Alliance does not oppose the development of new housing and new options for housing, different types of housing, but we don't believe that the building our way out of it narrative is a substitute for stabilizing rents for the people who live here now. What else?
My dog agrees, Matt. Just to tack on to something before the go to court admonishment, agreed. Don't, if you're sick though, and there's a question in the chat. I've heard this in court before. If you can't make it, they said, I asked to I couldn't go, to postpone. What's the likelihood that'll get approved? I've definitely heard them approved, especially if you're sick. You can make a motion to move your court date. Let me throw that out there if you're not well. But the likelihood that it'll get approved, I don't know. But here's what I want to plug is on the second floor where the housing court is, there is like a self-help center. If your motion is denied and they go ahead without you, what have you, there's lawyers there. You can walk in and any kind of question about reopening your case, what you can do, that's on the second floor of the court. And that, again, that's kind of like a funded thing, free lawyers there for questions like that.
Okay, and also when you say make a motion, David, in legal speak, but could you also just call the clerk of the court and say, hey, look, I've got COVID, or look, I have a medical problem, or some other reasonable emergency that would make it impossible for me to show up on that date?
One housing court, one and the same, I think. Yeah, I think if you call the clerk, they'll either kind of pass that note to the court. I feel like I've seen that done, which has the same kind of effect. Or if you know how to just kind of send a letter down to saying I need it, that would probably get. But yeah, an effort is appreciated, and then again, even if it's denied, can be acted on later, and lawyers can help with that.
Okay, well, I would also urge anybody who does that to make sure that you get something in writing that shows that in fact your concern was heard and that a decision to postpone was made, so that you don't fail to show up.
And the same I would go for if a property manager tells you that a case has been dismissed, or that anything, if you have that in email, that's great too. If you decide not to go for that reason.
I would go.
There you go, Pat. That's.
We have looks like Nathan Beauville, who is the Chief of Community Development. We have with us this evening, and I think he'd like to make a few comments before we finish.
Community development for whom?
Oh, code
For
enforcement.
DHCA.
Code enforcement here, yeah.
I don't know who that person is.
Code Enforcement Division.
All right, hang on a sec. Let me find him, and I will.
Okay.
You can. Who is it now?
Nathan
Beauville.
Hang on, Nathan. We'll see if we can bring you in here.
Yeah, he's in the chat.
There he is. And David, I think you have to do that.
Okay, let me see if I can.
On the right side, you'll
Yeah, I can see him there now.
make him a.
And then promote to panelist. He should. Let's see if that did it, Nathan. If you're able to accept that, he seems like he's rejoining, so he should pop up in just a second here.
There he is.
There he is.
Nathan, you wanted to make a comment?
Yes, good afternoon or good evening. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Didn't see you.
Yeah, I
Good
first I'd
evening.
like to say it's been a pleasure to be a part of this meeting. I'm here from DHCA. I am the Chief of Community Development at DHCA. I've been there for all of 2 months.
Yeah.
And but I
And
did
you
want to
live to
introduce
tell the tale.
myself. I'm sorry.
You live to tell the tale.
I live. Everybody keeps telling me that. I've heard that from starting my second day. But I'm new at Montgomery County, but I'm not new to housing. I've been in the affordable housing world for about 25 years. I spent about 21 years at the DC Housing Authority, rose up to the level of the Deputy Executive Director, and also was at Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County for about 3 years, and then came over to DHCA just recently, about 2 months ago. But I know this discussion is primarily has been about rent and rent relief and things of that nature. But I just wanted to make sure that renters know that there's another arm at DHCA other than ALTA that helps to provide assistance to renters, and that's our code enforcement division. We're responsible for enforcing chapters 26, 28, 58, 48, and 49-17 to make sure that renters and landlords that landlords provide housing, that's safe, sanitary, and decent, and is well maintained. And all those codes that I reference are codes that make sure that the apartments are kept well, that the lawns and the grounds are kept well, that the solid waste is dealt with, and that the sidewalks are kept well as well. And most recently, we have been engaging with a number of advocates, a number of landlords who have expressed some concerns about landlords' unwillingness to perform work, to take care of extermination, to fix, make repairs, to provide heat and hot water and air conditioning during the summer. And we are the arm of Montgomery County that exists to enforce those types of regulations. We are not there to enforce the lease with the tenant. We're not there to enforce any other regulations regarding immigration or any other legal matters. We're simply there to make sure that the renters are living in well-maintained apartments. And I just wanted to introduce myself and to tell the folks on the call that if they do experience any of those issues that have to do with the physical nature of how their building is being maintained, they should absolutely call Montgomery County's 311 center, ask for code enforcement, and report theirs. When that happens, it goes to a separate division outside of DHCA. Those calls get recorded. They then get disseminated to DHCA, and then we're able to push out our code enforcement officers to investigate those issues. And we want to make sure that people know that you have to go through that process. So you don't have to call 911. You don't have to call, and you're more than welcome to call your council members, but your first course of action should be calling 311. That's the most immediate way to get us out there so that we can come in, we can investigate the case. And if we find that there are some circumstances where the landlord is not living up to his obligations, we will issue violations to the landlord. Those violations will come in one of two forms. They'll either be a general violation or an emergency field notice. An emergency field notice is for anything that's health, life, and safety related, and those usually have to be abated within 24 hours. And then our inspectors have some judgment as to how long it takes to fix some of the other violations. They're usually about 15 days. And if the landlord doesn't make those repairs and you continue to have those live in those conditions, then we will issue citations which have a financial impact on the landlord or the property owner. So I just wanted to introduce myself, to encourage people to reach out to the Department of Housing and Community Development, Department of Housing and Community Affairs, through Maryland's 311 customer service process, so that we can help you to make sure that you're living in conditions that we would be happy to live in ourselves.
Well, thank you, Nathan. Had I known you were coming on, we would have made you a panelist to begin with. We're delighted always to have code officers and people in charge of code on our renter town halls. And we will invite you back in the future to get into some specifics about code enforcement. Since you're new, I'll just tell you that there was a time when things were fairly unorganized with code, and now the county executive Elrich, and because of a bill we passed in 2016, code has moved towards concentrating enforcement on troubled properties. And of course, working together with us, we are always urging people, don't let a broken appliance go on for days. Don't live in a cold apartment in the winter or a hot apartment in the summer. There are codes out there that are in place to protect you. And the Office of Code Enforcement at the Department of Housing and Community Affairs is there to enforce that. And so we are grateful, Nathan, that you could join us and tell us that and distinguish between code enforcement and the issues of your rights as a renter and your lease rights that are enforced by the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs. And just to mop up that confusion about the departments, the Department of Housing and Community Development is a state housing department. The Department of Housing and Community Affairs is Montgomery County's housing department. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time, Director Losack.
And thank you, Nathan. We'll invite you back now that you've made the mistake of letting us know who you are.
I'll be glad to come back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. I want to address a question that has come up, and we're getting ready to close up here, but there are other legislative proposals that we have. We are going to be pushing a proposal that we hope, would require property managers and landlords in Montgomery County to be trained and certified in order to operate in Montgomery County. We think that so much of the problems we see out there are because property managers turn over all the time. They don't know what the law is. They don't know what best practices are for managing an apartment community. And the same thing with landlords, especially the smaller landlords. If they knew what the laws were and what the requirements are, many of the complaints we receive wouldn't happen. So we think that that is an appropriate approach to managing housing in Montgomery County. On the security issue, we understand it is happening not just on rental properties, but across the county. Crime is on the increase, happening across the country. Crime is on the increase. People are under stress. We are seeing more and more issues of domestic violence. There have been far too many, of course, people know of these shootings that have taken place in some of the apartment communities around Montgomery County. There is no requirement at this time beyond, and Nathan, jump in if I miss something, beyond the security of making sure your door locks work. Outside of that, there's no requirement that there be cameras. There's no requirement that there be 24-hour security in your building. There's no requirement that your building hire security to patrol, even though they should do all of those things. But I will say that if your lease or the advertising of the property that you live in says that there's supposed to be 24-hour concierge and there is not, then you have a complaint for the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs that you're not getting something that you're paying for. If there are cameras on the property that are supposed to be in good working order and they are not, then I believe, Nathan, that would fall under code. Is that correct? You're on mute. Still on mute. There you go.
Okay, I'm not aware of a specific code that relates to cameras. I can certainly look into that. But I do know that, as you previously stated, if it's a service or a amenity that's been advertised and it's a part of what you pay for your lease, then that would be something that Ulta would definitely address.
Right. So these are security measures that if you're promised in what they advertise or it's in your lease, then you have every right to demand that it be in working order. As for whether or not properties should have some sort of security operation in place, we certainly agree that it should happen. Just bear in mind that if you say we need 24-hour concierge in our building and you haven't traditionally had it, that the landlord, even under a rent stabilization program, would probably be entitled to say, I'll do it, but I'm going to have to raise everybody's rents. So something to keep in mind, but for many people, it might very well be worth it. What else, staff, do we have out there for folks that we can address in the last few minutes?
Well, I see Fernando's still with us, and if you don't mind, we had a question asking about the relationship between HOC and a rental assistance for a rental assistance applicant? And just whether, I guess, the question is what role of HOC where there's a current rental assistance application? And I guess I just wanted to double check that. Is there anything different when someone is either receiving a voucher or at a subsidized property when they're filling out the application, or if they have a portion that they have to pay that they can't pay or something?
I would say that there's no difference. Except for the fact that they may be expedited a little bit more, because the last thing you want is someone to lose a voucher, right? So that's something that comes into play, and definitely a documentation that you definitely want to upload or let us know about.
And having come from HOC, I'm very, abundantly aware that they are working to provide assistance to having to have renters with the applications. They are providing copies of leases. They've been doing some applications actually for landlords. They've been working with some other community organizations at some of the larger properties like Seneca and Cider Mill to process those applications. So if there is an issue, I would encourage folks to reach out to the property manager, whether it's third party managed or whether it's a scattered site, it's HOC that's managed by a HOC staff person. They're strongly invested in trying to assist renters with processing those applications.
Well, that's good to hear.
I've only been gone 2 months. So I'm still having a little rough time of letting go.
Well, no, it's great in this context because that's helpful to hear. I think we've had questions about when the site is actually HOC's on site and their role in that. So I think that's what they were asking. Thank you. That's
You're
awesome.
welcome.
The only other question, there was a floating question about.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, there's a floating question from before about like deposits. I think getting your deposit back. Someone asked upon move out, how they can address things being charged that weren't expected. And I think that you usually have some bullet points about getting your deposit back. I don't know if you want to go through.
Yeah, let me whip through that real quick. First of all, we urge all tenants when you move into an apartment, take pictures. If you have a walkthrough with the property manager, make sure that they have a checkoff list of how the apartment looks when you move in so that you can compare it when you move out. And when you move out, you're entitled to a walkthrough that goes through and says, what's wrong, what's not, what was already broken in the apartment when you moved in, and so on. You're entitled to normal wear and tear. There are certain, conditions in a property. If you've lived in it long enough, you're entitled to have small holes in the wall where you put nails to hold up pictures, but they can't be bigger than just a tiny hole. That is something that's considered, part of normal wear and tear. You're not responsible for repainting the apartment. You're not responsible for other types of common maintenance in the flipping of an apartment from yourself to the next tenant. You're also entitled after a walkthrough, and we urge you to take pictures before you leave. And what I would do if make sure that your pictures are date stamped, so that if your camera doesn't do it, then put a Washington Post or something in the picture that shows the date, so that you can prove these were taken just when I moved out. Get a walkthrough, get the property manager to sign off on the walkthrough. You're entitled then by law to receive within 45 days by first-class mail a list of any damages done in the apartment that the landlord intends to charge you for. Now, that doesn't mean the landlord has carte blanche to charge you for whatever they want. They have to be legitimate charges from damages that you caused. The Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs has a landlord-tenant handbook, which Renters Alliance is happy to help edit. And they have a whole section on security deposits. Can one of my staff put up the link to the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs Landlord Tenant Handbook? Let's make sure people can get that. It's also on the Department of Housing and Community Affairs website. But you can read what your responsibilities and rights are with regard to security deposits. If the landlord flagrantly refuses to give back your security deposit or is demanding funds that he or she is not entitled to, they could be subject to treble, that is 3 times the security deposit in damages. And there is a process for complaining about that all the way up through the Commission of Landlord and Tenant Affairs and ultimately to court if necessary. Let me throw out one announcement. We will have, because there are so many issues going on here, especially with regard to apartment community security. On the 29th of January, the Renters Alliance is hosting a renter community event at the Silver Spring Civic Center. It will include Delegate Janelle Wilkins, Council Member Kate Stewart, Police Department representatives from the 2nd and 3rd District, that's the Bethesda and Silver Spring districts, and others to discuss issues of building security and other renter issues and perhaps upcoming legislation. So mark your calendars. This is an in-person meeting, and it will be at the Silver Spring Civic Center at 4 o'clock on Sunday, January 29th. And we will, if you're on this call, you'll receive emails about this in our newsletter announcing it down the road. But we also seriously encourage you all to participate to find out what's going on with regard to renters' rights and legislation. Is there anything else in the last moment? All right. And in that case, let me thank Fernando Ortega, who's got the major responsibility of managing such an important program. We thank you for being with us, providing information and working with us as we help these people who are desperate for rental assistance. I want to thank Nathan Bovell for a welcome and surprise visit and providing your expertise and your enthusiasm. It's always good to see.
Matt,
and we'll invite you back. Yes, Dave.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
I want to second that. And then one thing came in the Q&A just now, which is that someone asked if the city rent relief programs are ending on the 13th also, and want to make sure I just get out there that their individual ones are not, and that people that live in these municipalities can apply to the county program. Just want to clarify that up until the end of day Friday there. And then, but those city programs are all on their own, and would still recommend reaching out or contacting us if you want to follow up on those. Sorry.
Yeah, that's correct. They're on their own. Not sure what exactly their timeline is, but our program, the portal will close on Friday, so we definitely want to get those applications in, but we'll continue to work those applications that are in the portal currently.
Thank you. That was important. All right, and thank you to David Mullins and Pat Beckham and Malek Demir and all of you who attended with us